If it had been dereliction of duty, it looks like you might have gotten 2 or 3 others.
Following Donald Trump's acquittal, mainstream press appears to think that Republicans could have been convinced to convict Donald Trump if given the right argument. Now, this, again, goes to the absurd idea that Republicans actually care about the facts. They were always going to acquit Trump no matter what argument was brought up, no matter what witnesses were brought up, they were always going to acquit him. But mainstream media thinks otherwise. So here is an example of that. This is Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press talking to Jamie Raskin about what he could have done better.
I want to get to 3 specific what ifs, okay, or backseat driving that people might be doing. Maybe you're doing it to yourself. What if number 1 is this? When it was clear that the trial wasn't going to start until after Joe Biden was inaugurated, was there any thought of taking an extra week, an extra 2 weeks before starting the trial for you to do more investigating? All right, on witnesses, it seems as if this was a last-minute decision to go ahead and try to call Jamie Herrera Butler. Should you have had a witness plan much sooner that might have included Mike Pence, Kevin McCarthy, Jamie Herrera Butler, Mark Short, people like that? One more of those what ifs. Insurrection versus dereliction of duty. And I know you made a pretty compelling argument, I think, in your closing argument about how you couldn't disaggregate them. But if it had been dereliction of duty, it looks like you might have gotten 2 or 3 others.
This is ridiculous. Now, yes, it's fair to criticize Democrats for maybe not bringing up witnesses, maybe not doing enough. I'll get to each of the specific what-ifs in a second here. Also, I'll get to a video of Raskin responding to this. But if the measure of success is conviction or not, then there is nothing Democrats could have done to get Republican senators to convict Donald Trump. There just isn't. It doesn't matter what more witnesses or what witnesses were brought up. It doesn't matter what arguments were made. There is nothing they could have done to get Republican senators to convict Donald Trump. Because if you look at Mitch McConnell's argument as an example, he agrees that Donald Trump incited this riot. But his reasoning for not convicting him or not voting to convict is that, oh, well, Trump is no longer president, so you can't impeach somebody who's no longer president. So showing you it doesn't matter what they would have brought up. Mitch McConnell would have made that same argument. Nothing would have changed. They could have stretched this out for months, delaying any potential improvements or any potential bills that could have been passed through the Senate to actually help people. Nothing would have changed. So there was really no need to delay this any further. Now, before I even go into any of these specific arguments here, I want to show you public polling on this. As a recent Ipsos ABC News poll shows that the majority of Americans think Trump should have been convicted, saying 58% think Trump should have been convicted. So the public was already convinced. You just were never going to get Republicans on board. The idea that the media puts out there that, oh, if Democrats just brought up the right argument, just made a better case, you would have convinced those Republicans, you would have got 17 Republican senators to convict. Are you insane? Do you know what this Republican Party is? Where have you been? I don't know why they push this false idea out there. Look, I get it makes sense to push back on Democrats saying, hey, maybe you should have brought up witnesses, maybe you should have done this or that. Fine, but don't do it under the guise of if you did it, then Republicans would have been convinced, because that is just not true. So going over some of these arguments, before I get to Raskin's clip here, Chuck Todd brings up any thought on to taking an extra week or 2 before the trial to do more investigating. So according to Raskin, they actually did. And again, I mean, it was all on video. We saw it all. We know exactly what Trump did. It wasn't just about that day. It was about the months leading up to it, about not accepting the results of the election. So it was all of it leading up to that day, January 6th, where the actual riot happened. It was all, I mean, all on camera. There wasn't, I'm not sure what more investigating really needed to be done. We saw it all. Other argument he made, should they have had a witness plan much sooner? Again, the idea that more evidence would have helped, obviously it wouldn't. But even say they brought up what Chuck Todd brought up there, Mike Pence as a witness or Kevin McCarthy, do you think they would have really told the truth? Would that have actually helped their case? It may have actually hurt them. So I don't think it made sense bringing them up. Sure, you could have brought up it's been a long weekend. You could have brought up some witnesses that would have helped, but ultimately, really, if the goal here is to get Republicans to vote differently, nothing would have changed. And then the last argument, should it have been dereliction of duty as opposed to insurrection? Again, the idea that it would have changed anything, that would not have changed the way that Mitch McConnell approached this, so no. And let me actually play for you Jamie Raskin's response to that very question.
You know, remember, these are Republicans who voted to acquit in the face of this mountain of unrefuted evidence. We're going to find some reason to do it. So if we had charged dereliction of duty, they would have said, that's not an impeachable offense. You got to deal with that within the military system. The president is not bound by the Code of Universal Military Justice and the Uniform Code of Military Justice and so on. I mean, you know, you can always come up with a lawyer's argument to get to where you want to go. And they did not honestly confront the reality of what happened to America.
That's exactly right. You can always find a lawyer's argument to argue for where you want to go. And that's exactly what Mitch McConnell did. Mitch McConnell stated that he thought Trump incited the riot. But in his words, his mind, you can't convict a president who's already out of office. He thinks it's unconstitutional, which it's not. People in power, a person in power has been convicted before after leaving their position. So this is not new. But that's the argument they were going to make regardless of what was brought up, what witnesses were brought up, what evidence was brought up. They were never going to convict Donald Trump. So this idea that Democrats were at fault for this, I blame Democrats for a lot. There's nothing here that they could have done to help this situation. And the public were already on their side. So what else could they really do at this point? One last thing here, just to give extra context. Ari Berman here tweeting out, shocking stat, 57 senators who voted to convict Trump represent 76.7 million more Americans than 43 senators who voted to acquit. Now, this applies across the board to any piece of legislation. Blue states, by and large, just have more people in them than red states. So much of what is done in Washington does not represent the best interests of people at large. You can apply it to impeachment. You can apply it to almost anything else. This is the way Washington operates, and I think people should be reminded of this stat again and again, showing you just how disconnected Washington is, how it's way more conservative than actual people in the country are.